Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to The Open Door. Jim Hannock and Matthew Bartko here with our friends John Breen and Christy Yao. We're looking forward to some special guests who have been with us on other occasions, but we're going to begin, as always, with a prayer. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful, and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you will renew the face of the earth. Let us pray. Lord, by the light of the Holy Spirit, you have taught the hearts of your faithful. In the same Spirit, help us to relish what is right, and always rejoice in your consolation. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. This week we're going to return to our discussion of pro-life feminism. Last week we returned to an earlier discussion of how to get involved, seriously involved in local politics. But now we're back to pro-life feminism. And there are a number of questions we'd like to consider. There's so much more to say about New Life feminism, New Wave feminism, and Rehumanizing feminism. And we have a series of questions that have been put before the panel. And what I'm going to do is to ask our effervescent colleague, Christy Yao, to get us started, keeping in mind that John Breen is waiting in the wings, as are the rest of us. So, Christy, can you get us started?
Sure. So to give a brief overview of feminism, we're going to look at the timeline of feminism. I found a really good resource at progressivewomenleadership.com, the brief history, and I'll add kind of my own insights and personal thoughts on the history of feminism. So feminism in its most simple form is just saying men are equal to women. Women have rights. Women are people, which sounds like a pretty simple concept, but as we've seen throughout history through various different avenues. So the first wave of feminism was basically just this simple thing. Women should be able to own property. Women should be able to vote is a huge one. Women should be seen as individuals, not necessarily tied to whatever man, father, husband, son, whoever. And the first wave of feminism actually was strongly pro-life. Something that gets a little bit misconstrued. People don't really realize that the first people who fought for women to be recognized as individuals also were largely nonviolent, number one, and number two, going along with that, were largely protectors of the unborn. So the second wave of feminism, and that was the first wave, was some say the 1830s to the early 1900s, others say the late 1800s to 1920 when women gained the right to vote. There's kind of discussion. And then kind of World War I and World War II happened, and we got a little bit distracted as a country, basically. But then in World War II, people saw like Rosie the Riveter, like, hey, we can do this. Women can be strong. Women can run factories. Women can do all these things. So a little bit after that, following in the 1960s to the 1980s, people thought more about, hey, what does feminism mean? What does equality mean? And this went along with other movements sometimes, like the civil rights movement, LGBT movements, and then other times it was, unfortunately, kind of just feminism for the educated white woman. The educated white woman deserved equal pay, but we can forget the rest. So, and then also, unfortunately, this led to a discussion of legalized abortion and kind of masking that as feminism. So the third wave came, some people say the 80s, some people say the 90s, to the early 2000s. And that's when you talk about the micropolitics of gender equality. When you talk about kind of the smaller things, which will ultimately lead to the Me Too movement, which some are branding, and I would agree with them, as the fourth wave of feminism. A wave that say, hey, women don't only deserve the right to equal pay. Women don't only deserve the right to the vote or deserve the right to, these kind of tangible things. Women also deserve the right to feel safe. I also deserve the right to not have to kind of constantly be on my guard around men. I also deserve the right to live as a free citizen, not only in the tangible things like the pay and the right to vote and property owning, but I also have a right to feel like an individual citizen. So, that's it.
That's quite a bit. John, would you like to raise any questions for Christy in her overview?
Just a couple of comments. You talked about the couple of waves of feminism, starting from the first wave that would be like in the 1980s, early 1900s. Just my comment on that one. I've a couple weeks ago when we first looked over this subject with our two special guests there, I did a little research and looked up on G.K. Chesterton on his views of the feminist movement and whatnot. And he basically foresaw back in the 1930s, late 1800s, what the feminist movement was going to do and how it would end up, which is the mess that we have right now. So he was viewed as a person who was anti-feminism, anti-women's suffragette, and basically as a misogynist. But that really wasn't the case. He simply saw that the feminist movement was going to be perverted and that it was going to become almost a radical sort of liberalism. So I'm looking at this article right in front of me. It's put out by the Christian History Institute, giving Chesterton's views on different topics, and one of them is the feminist movement. And basically, he saw from the get-go that it was a start from the woman walking away from her role in society as a wife and a mother, and as a person who would enter the work field and basically stay in that realm. So the way he saw it was that the whole suffragette movement, that it was that big business gave a bunch of air to that fire, as they saw it as a possible reservoir of cheap labor. So that's why big business was in favor of the suffragette movement. And as it turned out, that a woman is seen less and less in her place in the home as a wife and a mother, and more as an individual working in the factory or in the workplace. So with
That's
that,
so interesting.
Sure, go ahead.
I'd never thought of it in that concept, and I'd really love to kind of read more about that and dive into it more. So now I'm wondering if there's some way we can repair that, if there's some way we can give dignity to the female worker, dignity to the female person through some sort of healing process. And I'm wondering what that would look like. Do you have any thoughts? Because, I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say you probably don't think that all women, have to be tied in the home, tied to the family. Though it obviously is a beautiful thing to not be forced to be tied there, but to choose to be there. How can we kind of
that? Sure. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm just wondering, how can we repair that? How can we put dignity back in the workplace for all workers, including this half of the population that's women?
Well, part of the issue too is that it's the fall down of the family too, because and I've heard a lot of politicians say, in even recent times, that the future is feminine. Well, how can the future be feminine at the cost of the traditional family? So if we have women out in the workplace who don't want to be mothers, how can the future be feminine when we disregard the family? So with femininity and masculinity, both are complementary, not contradictory, and they both come together in the familial sense. So there can't be dignity for either men or women if there's a disregard for the dignity of family. So it all starts in the family.
Maybe the solution is to put family first and to put work second, rather than, I feel like so often it's work first and then figure out what you're going to do about your family. Maybe the solution is more maternity leave, higher quality childcare, things like that.
I also feel the need to jump in and point out that paternity leave is also a feminist issue.
True.
I think that a large portion of what we're dealing with and what we have to be careful of, especially when we're talking about traditional gender roles and traditional family arrangements, is that for the vast majority of those waves of feminism that Christy highlighted, there was the assent to putting family first. It was for the good of the family that women were looking for equal pay and for the right to vote. And that if we have a healthy view of the family, we also have a healthy role for the man to play in the family and the care of the home. It might be controversial to some of our listeners, but I don't see any problem with a stay-at-home father over a stay-at-home mother. There are some men more apt to the care of children than women, and some women more apt for the workplace than the men they may be married to. I think I
100% agree. I always joke to my little brother, he's not feminine. I don't want to say that. But he's so nurturing and caring. I always tell him, you're going to be my Manny. I'll go out and I'll do whatever I'm going to do. And you'll come and you'll take care of my kids. It's a pretty good arrangement. So I'm 1,000%.
What we have to do is we have to have a healthy view of masculinity and a healthy view of femininity, and not apply the tools of misogyny that limit people's choices and limit people's freedom to control them, particularly as they've been used against the lower class and minorities, but instead acknowledge what aspects of those cultural norms have been healthy, liberating, and freeing to individuals and to honestly benefit the family, and which of those have in the past been tools to control and manipulate.
So true. I think that's an awesome point.
I have a couple thoughts to add to the mix. One is inspired by John's historical sketch, and the other is prompted by Christie's how could we handle that sort of inquiry. There's a wonderful, wonderful art disguised as a game, according to the great Soviet encyclopedia, called chess. And I've spent a long, long time engaged in that art disguised as a game. But there is something, once again, art disguised as a game, that's widely recognized as much more sophisticated than chess. And even though supercomputers have for some time now held sway over even grandmasters in chess, it's only been in the last year or so that the computers could do that with the game activity art of Go, G-O. Now, I introduced Go for this reason. If in chess It's the gaining of space that's crucial. In Go, what's ultimately crucial is the surrounding and absorption of the forces of one's opponents. Absorb by way of surrounding. And I think what happens with a great many efforts at social change, and I would call feminism such an effort, is that it's surrounded and absorbed by opposing forces. And sometimes this happens quite explicitly, and sometimes it's more implicitly. And what I have in mind as the triumphant go force in the context in which we're speaking is really capitalism. A kind of capitalism that has nothing to do with mom and pop shops or small businesses, but the capitalism of giant multinational corporations. And I think this kind of capitalism is perfectly willing and demonstrably capable of gobbling up and absorbing productive and deeply progressive social trends. And I think that oftentimes this is what's happened with feminism. In fact, I think oftentimes it's happened with Christianity. Christianity becomes okay because it leads to a citizenry that's pretty stable, and a stable citizenry is a citizenry that's commercially productive, and a citizenry that's commercially productive is a capitalist civilization, as it were. And I think it's only at our peril that we lose sight of these mega economic forces that again and again and again distort efforts for real change. Now, on Christie's point, what might we do? What might we change? How might we regain the initiative? Well, we always have to be asking that question, but very, very recently, and this is within the last week or so, I think the employees of a little company called Amazon did this very effectively. Is it Amazon or is it no? I think I might have gotten the wrong company because I kind of conflate them. Where they're all coming together. Is it Facebook? Well, at any rate, the employees walked off the job en masse, male and female, in order to challenge the sexual abuse arbitration process that the company had put into place, because the arbitration process wasn't working. And now, just a minute, I'm getting my facts up in better order. I think this is Google, not Amazon, not Facebook, but Google. All right, everybody.
Yeah, this was recent.
Right. All right, everyone. Everybody, in order to obliterate Annick's confusion, let's say Google 3 times. Google, Google, Google. At any rate, it was very successful. It was very successful. And it's a case of employees understanding that given the entity for which they were working, they had to come together in a kind of information age union. And I thought it was splendid. Now, splendid as it was, I suspect that the effects won't last more than 6 months or so, given the way the world is. And so we must always be, put it quite bluntly, agitating.
Still there, Jim?
I'm here. Dead space.
Oh, I thought you were building to a question.
No. You know, why have a question when you could have a proclamation? Go ahead, Matthew.
Oh, sorry. You can go ahead.
Anybody, go ahead. You've had to listen for 4 or 5 minutes to a rant.
I'd like to kind of go off of Jim's first point, talking about how capitalism kind of destroyed feminism by introducing kind of a sidebar history of feminism called ecofeminism, which is saying that the way that we've kind of degraded our environment has most affected women. And I think that's so true with the jobs that women usually have, which house certain effects of the environment, have affected fertility. It's really ecofeminism, I think, is a great strategy and a great way to kind of combat that capitalist feminist issue.
Excellent. I do wonder when we're talking about, and I don't even know that it's repair because I don't know that it was ever fully there in Western society. Are we talking about really building up to or achieving, perhaps for the first time, a fully functioning view of the dignity of the family as a whole? But perhaps what has been most lacking in that historically has been the dignity of the woman.
I would agree. I would say we've never really achieved that. And that's something we always have to be striving towards. And we always have to be seeing, where are we lacking? Why aren't we kind of having the dignity of the family? I think even when some would argue that there were great family values in this country, it was mostly for white families. Even when most people survive on one income, and I'm not saying that women should have to stay home and work and not work, obviously, but even when it was feasible to survive in this country on a single income, it was mostly feasible for white people. African American mothers have always had to work, and that's what people don't really go into and don't really realize.
I think as an indication that while there are the economic factors, and I've been stressing them, it's an indication that there are other factors as well. As best as I can tell from my reading, black families in the United States were far more resilient, were far more intact in the earlier decades of the last century than they were post-World War II, post-breaking into the 60s, that in fact the fragmentation of the black family was greatly accentuated as the century wore on. And so what's going on there? I think there's always the economic background, because I think most of us spend most of our time working, and that's the economic context. But there's also the loss of regard for the dignity of the human body. The so-called sexual revolution was a fiasco, and if anything is worsening, and that has an enormous impact on the family. And also, as well, there's the secularization. Insofar as we have an ever more aggressive secularization, an ever more aggressive denial of the existence of God and God's revelation, the family is profoundly undermined. So we have a number of huge factors coming together, giving us what we have today. At least so is history as I read it. But John, you started us off. Why don't you get us back?
Back on the issue of feminism.
And what's what, and the historical influences and so forth.
Well, just to pick up from what you were saying there, I think that what you're saying is true there. That back in prior to the 1960s, that the family was a more protected structure. It had its place in society, and it was and it was basically respected. And one of the statistics that I recently came across was that prior to the 1960s, single motherhood was, even in black families, was at a 20%. It was at 20% at the most, but since then, it's now gone up to almost 70%. And there's a lot of factors that we can blame and whatnot, but I would say one of the main ones, and you kind of alluded to back in the 1960s, with the sexual revolution. I think also the current situation as it is, it's also a statement of the failure of Lyndon Johnson's vision for a great society, where basically men and women could walk away from their families, and that there's no retribution for a lack of responsibility. And all these are basically fuel the fire for the feminist movement, where the feminist movement is now basically anti-family and completely liberal. So
I have to object.
I think we have to. You can go, Matthew, if you like.
Go ahead, Christy.
I think what we have to remember is it's all intersectional. Intersectionality is so important. And we have to look at how our society treats these families. And we have to look at the greater incarceration rates for African American males. I heard a professor at my college once say that when we look back on our society, basically maybe in 50 years, when history looks back on America, our great stain will be the amount of African American men incarcerated. So I think that's a hugely important thing to remember. But of course, you can't just blame not only the breakdown of one group, but the breakdown of every group of families on one thing. You have to remember it's all intersectional. And it is very important to look back in history. If you look back at welfare before the Great Society, more Great Depression era, you'll see that African American single mothers weren't given welfare. That there is intrusive home checks there are kind of chastity laws that if you had a man in the house that wasn't your husband, you would get your welfare taken away from you. And African American mothers were at a much, much higher rate checked in the middle of the night to see if there was these ridiculous things. So I think we have to kind of keep history in perspective and keep all the intersectionalities in perspective.
I think that intersectionality is important, and it is important to remember that people have a multitude of identities. For example, it's entirely possible that Protestant feminism may look different than Catholic feminism, may look different than atheistic feminism. But the feminist movement being a movement to address all women, I don't know that it is useful for us to fixate on a particular minority that has had so much institutionalized prejudice applied against them. There's perhaps no more historically oppressed people group in the United States than the black woman. And that may certainly be something worth addressing in future shows, but I don't know that we have done the legwork at this point to appropriately address that. I know.
100% agree. Yeah.
I know that when I, look up the definition of the word patriarchy, it's essentially a social system in which males hold primary power and the predominant roles in political, moral, and social areas of privilege, along with the control of property. And I think that one of the things that has made a lot of people historically uncomfortable has been fear of losing that position of privilege, or that society will unravel if those privilege paradigms are challenged. but I certainly think that, at least among the panelists here, the strides that have been accomplished to overcome that are now in hindsight, such as women gaining the right to own property, women gaining the right to have standing to testify in court, women gaining the vote, women gaining protection to be in the workforce. We're still dealing with issues of equal pay, of fighting against pregnancy discrimination, of ensuring that the family can be protected. I'm curious to hear the other panelists talk on issues even as mundane, some might say, as household chores. When we're thinking about our gender roles, do we think there's something inherently feminine about doing the dishes as opposed to fixing the car? Or are those areas that, whoever's best suited simply does them and we don't worry about the gender role for them? Jim, how do you think we're moving through history toward a world where people do the work they're ideally suited for, as opposed to having gender-associated skill sets?
Thanks for asking, Matthew. There are a number of issues that you've just introduced. I think with regard to the whole set of issues leading up to household chores, I think Christy was referring to them as tangible questions. I don't think there's any disagreement among any of us on the panel about such matters. And I think that insofar as we associate feminism with those basic questions of political and economic equality, I say 2 cheers for feminism. Why only 2 cheers? Because if one picks up something like, as I do every morning, the New York Times or the Los Angeles Times, the term feminism has been extended way beyond those basic rights and liberties. And the most egregious example of it, of course, is abortion. It's understood by mainstream, such as that mainstream is, feminist leadership, that, a central woman's issue is access to abortion. And of course, when we talk about intersectionality, we're talking about everything coming together. And when things come together, oftentimes there are enormous crashes. Consider what happens when things come together in the 405 in Los Angeles. So the term feminism, and I think John is keen on this, and I think Christy wants to dispel it and make it so that it's not so. And I'm with her in that I wish it were not so, but I'm with John in that it is so pretty much now. People who are in the mainstream of cultural life, who take themselves to be feminists, uniformly support abortion, and they uniformly support a kind of denial of biological reality when it comes to sex. And it's not that this just happens with something like feminism. It happens with Christianity. It happens with democracy. To go theological, original sin is the preeminent equal opportunity employer or preeminent equal opportunity besetter. When human beings come together and work for the good, ineluctably there are elements of corruption, and this happens with the best of movements. And I think this happens throughout history, and I think that something like the American Solidarity Party is itself waging an uphill battle. That's because this is what happens. This is how it happens when we try to do politics. We can do it well. There are cases in which we can do it well, but we're always prey to doing it very poorly. Now, I think in the American Solidarity Party, we need to look for green shoots, as it were, and nurture those green shoots. But at the same time, we can't overlook the fact that there are green shoots rather than verdant green forests because of, well, our fallen human nature. Does that put a stop on organization? It shouldn't put a stop on organization. It should be an incentive for us to organize and do so with the, what is it in Scripture, the guilelessness of a dove and the wiliness of a snake, or words to that effect. But once again, I've gone on to a rant.
I think it's critical to remember what Christy opened the show with, and remembering that there are waves of thought that have been associated with the feminist movement. And as you say, those shoots, organizations like we had represented by Destiny 2 weeks ago, New Wave Feminism. I think about Rehumanize International. I think about Secular Pro-Life. I think about Build the Bridge, a group focused on racial reconciliation that also acknowledges a lot of feminist theory. All of these different organizations, all of these movements. I talk to young women who aren't pro-life, but are in, they're millennials or Generation Y, and they're coming up and they're encountering the history of feminist theory for the first time. And their ability to see the multifaceted nature of what has come before as they look toward what is coming in the future and what they're going to do with it as it becomes them. You see the signs every once in a while that says, "I am the pro-life generation." It just fills me with hope. I think that something that I encounter to my great frustration is people who seem to want to roll back society to some former glory that we had in the past without realizing that, humanity has always been fallen. And unless they're talking about rolling it back to the Garden of Eden, utopia is not to be found in our historic records. Whereas if we keep moving forward, yes, mistakes have been made. Yes, there are some things that have gone in the wrong direction. But I think that there is a case to be made that progress, that the imminent arriving of heaven on earth, that the kingdom is not now, but the kingdom, the kingdom has come, but the kingdom is not yet. That we are making strides as the church to be the body of Christ on earth. That earth will continue to improve. That's why the gospel has continued to flourish in more languages and reach more people than ever before. That's why infant mortality rates are down. That's why there's more peace on the earth. There's less death from war than likely there ever has been before on earth up to this date. And along with that comes technological advance, and along with that comes prospering cultural societies, and along with that has seemingly come, at least in part, in steps, the liberation of women, the liberation of ethnic minorities, the liberation of men from systems of patriarchy that had previously kept lower-class men confined to various rules that limited their pursuit of property and happiness. And I guess I would say that even though, yes, there is problematic associations with feminism in some of the ways that have come before, I'm very interested, I think this is where Christy was coming from, is in building the next wave. I personally consider myself a passionate feminist, in that I'm passionately for the good and the quality of women, and I think what that looks like is up to each subsequent generation. John, if you had to venture out and give a definition for how you think the majority of culture thinks feminism is now, How would you define that? And then, if I might throw a follow-up on there, how would you like to see it defined?
Well, as far as the current definition of feminism, it's basically an organization not just for advocating the freedoms of women, but also it's actually all, to me, it's based off the misinterpretation of freedom, where freedom is misplaced for license, and that the feminist movement have totally picked up on that, and went for it hook, line, and sinker. So, in that sense, that would be the definition of feminism. As for myself, I don't claim to be a feminist. Just the term ism. When I went to college, there's the very few instances where the word ism could actually have a positive connotation to it. So things like distributism or Catholicism, things like that. Those are very few cases where the term ism can be applied in a positive sense. But more likely than not, the word ism usually confines to a negative connotation. So, and I think that the current situation of feminism totally matches that. My biggest issue, when we went over feminism, like pro-life feminism, a couple of weeks ago, I didn't say a word on the program. Not only was I collecting my thoughts, but our guests also had a lot to say. And I'm giving my personal view on this, so the jury could be out on this one, and you guys are open to comment on it as you please. I don't really, to my sense, I don't really see the term pro-life and feminism going together, given that feminism from the very start was a perversion of freedom and a denial of the woman's traditional role as a wife and a mother. So how can the two be reconciled just by the terminology, given its history and the history of feminism and what it is now?
Oh my goodness, John, you're breaking my heart. So
we've got diversity on this panel, that's for sure.
If you look back to the original feminists, to the first wave of feminism, to the idea that a woman should be seen as equal to a man, and to the principle of nonviolence.
Well, just on that front, it never said that women were equal to men. Both are entitled to equal dignity. That's the big thing. But as regards to women and men, there is a stark difference between the two. So the word equality can't be applied in the biological sense. Both are entitled to equal dignity, but both are not equal.
Okay. What about equal protection under the law? Can we say that?
They're both individuals. Yeah, they're entitled to equal protection under the law.
Well, wonderful. So, yeah. And that's basically the whole kind of idea. And the reason it's not called I've heard people say, oh, I'm not a feminist, I'm an equalist. I'm an egalitarian. I believe that everyone should be equal. Well, that's what feminism is. And the reason it's called feminism and not called egalitarianism is because there was for so long this lack of the basic principle that women are human and that women should be equally regarded under the law. Like if someone, for example, was to come in and steal something out of my house, they shouldn't have to, repay my father, give the money back to my father or my brother, or I don't have a husband. But if I did, my husband, it's mine. I have a right to own property.
Right.
Someone shouldn't be able to cast a vote, not able to cast a vote. And that principle expands to the unborn, and kind of reaching into a more serious topic, which was accepted for so long. No one should be able to have physical violence against me. I should.
It just
Sorry?
seems like in the quest for equal rights for both, it seems like there's been a denial of fundamental principle of the traditional family of men in relation to women and vice versa. So when you focus so much on the equalitarian level, then you have the denial of the fundamental family.
Is a lack of education on the actual history of the movement. When you say that way back at the beginning, feminism started with fundamental misassumptions, it betrays a lack of historical context. If you go back to the 18th century, feminism got its start in the suffrage movement, and the reason that women wanted the right to vote was so that they could have a chance at getting equal protection under the law, which had been denied. You had laws that allowed for spousal abuse. I mean, people sickeningly joke about you can't beat your wife with a rod any thicker than your thumb. That has historical context in which it was legally permissible for men to batter their wives, and there was no legal protection for them because they were property. It goes back to a time where the idea of marital rape was nonsense because it was legally impossible to rape your wife. So when they're talking about things like women having control of their reproductive capabilities, or when they're talking about wanting to have equality, the root of it, if you're going to say back in the beginning, you're literally talking about women who would endure pregnancies because their husbands raped them until they were pregnant, or women who were literally beaten to death when their husbands were in a drunken rage. So if we're going to mention the origins, we have to talk about those original motivators. And I'm sorry if I am coming off as overly emotional about it, but one of the reasons that modern day feminists can get so emotional, get so impassioned about this when they hear people in any way badmouth feminism is because what they can hear is people desiring to go back to a day when women knew their place and they take their beatings and they take their raping that they're supposed to. And I know that no one on this panel is coming close to saying that, but I just want to make sure that no one who's listening to this program thinks that anyone's advocating that. We do acknowledge that history, and we do acknowledge the need, like Christy was saying, to have bodily safety, to have ownership over her own dignified humanity, that women are fully persons and deserve that equal protection, equal rights in the eyes of the courts of law and in the eyes of the police. Is that
and I think kind of backing off what Matthew said, I think that's a great segue into what it means to be a pro-life feminist. You're saying not only am I deserving of dignity and rights, my child is also deserving of those rights. Amen. Just like a man couldn't come, my husband couldn't come and beat me and end my life, I cannot end my child's life. That is violating their rights and their dignity as a human person, even when they're dependent on me and even when they're in the womb. Even if I was dependent on my husband financially, socially, even if I couldn't own land without him, he would have no right to violate my rights. Just like that, even if my child is dependent on me, I have no right to take away their life.
Here's a connection with what Matthew and Cindy have been saying, and I am very much sorry, Christy. Very much. I had a class once. There were 23 students in it, and 7 of them were named Jennifer. I'm not sure how that connects with anything, but I'm sorry for the name slip. Very, very sorry. If we think of the Roman pater familias, not only did the father of the Roman family have enormous control over his wife, but he could decide, and wives often agreed historically, he could decide that an infant should be left to die. This notion of domination and ownership is pervasive, and historically it runs right back through as far as anybody can go, and it ought to be challenged at every turn. And yet, to connect with something that John had to say, when we look at contemporary sexual ethics as they're understood in the larger culture, there is one and only one consideration: consent. That's it. That's it. The whole of sexual morality in the mainstream culture is reduced to consent, which is one expression of freedom. But there is so much more to healthy sexuality, and Matthew was talking about healthy femininity, healthy masculinity, healthy sexuality, integrally human sexuality. There is so much more than simple consent. Now, if we, in turn, look at the relationships among human beings, and we say, there's only one consideration: equality, I think once again we have a reductionist approach. Equality is an important theme, and in some cases any violation of equality can't possibly be justified. And consent is an important consideration, but neither consent nor equality are the whole story of ethical analysis. What I think John oftentimes tries to bring into the discussion is the notion of complementarity. And what the American Solidarity Party looks at is, first and foremost, the common good. And the common good isn't achieved when everybody has the same amount of income exactly. The common good isn't achieved when everybody is free to do what anybody feels like to do, so long as they don't directly interfere with anybody else. That second notion is libertarianism, and really you can trace it back along with other isms of the sort that John is opposed to, back to somebody like John Stuart Mill. Mill says unless somebody is doing something physically harmful to somebody else, the law shouldn't intervene. Well, I think the law teaches, and the law has a lot to teach us, and there's more than simply avoiding immediate physical harm that ought to be part of a legal system. And is this intersectionality? Well, intersectionality is a very, very current term, and rightly understood. I certainly don't have any objections to it. What I would say in terms of ethical analysis is there's a coming together of a range of moral principles, and when any one of them pushes out the others, what we have is a kind of distortion of what's real and what's good. And I think one of the great beauties of the American Solidarity Party is that it sees a kind of integration and a balance between the person and the community. Person and community. And the notion of person in community, the notion of person and community is greatly explored historically. Matthew's right about the importance of history. It's explored in depth by a group of, I don't know what wave you'd call them, but a group of philosophers in the middle part of the last century. And among them would be the Jewish thinker Martin Buber. Among them would be the Catholic thinker Jacques Maritain. And when I get round to Maritain, I can't help but think of another point that's come up in our discussion today, the question of progress. There is a view of progress that's absolutely linear. And the common pop view of it is every day, everything is getting better every day in every way. And of course, after the last century, that can't possibly be taken seriously. And then there's a chastened view I think Matthew has, and I'm oftentimes very sympathetic to it. Progress isn't linear, but it is, isn't it? 2 steps forward, 1 step back. 3 steps forward, step and a half back. It's mostly going forward. And when I'm feeling optimistic, I think that might be right. But Maritain himself had a different view, and I think it's the one to which I, in fact, subscribe. We are making great strides forward. We certainly are. And with every stride forward, there's a corollary of temptation. With every stride forward, the stakes get higher and higher and higher. With every step forward, there's an abyss that is always there that we can fall into. Take just one example that we might have some agreement about. Has science made great steps forward? Of course it has. Indisputably it has. Now, what about the possibility of nuclear war? I don't think it's less and less. I think it's about as bad as it's ever been. Has science made great steps forward? Of course it has. What about genetic manipulation? We've never been threatened by genetic manipulation, including genetic manipulation of the human being. We've never been so threatened as we have been before. So I think it's with fear and trembling that we need to work out our salvation, and nonetheless the Spirit is with us, and we can, as we should, build the Lord's kingdom today, but knowing always what threat we face. Good Lord, I can't stop the ranting, can I?
Could I just make one more comment, and then I'll be quiet here, just to clarify my earlier position. In my view, and this is just my view, that the way that we're going to overturn Roe versus Wade or abortion in general is a new view on the traditional family, and that the future is indeed family, and that it's only the structured family that's going to overturn abortion. So it's in that sense that I don't see how pro-life feminism that how that could even work if the focus is not on the family but instead on the feminist. So that's the short end of my rant there.
Matthew, can you say something that's reconciling and positive and short, because we have to have a prayer to end?
Absolutely, Jim. I want to thank all of you for this conversation today. And I think that when we limit ourselves to expressing that shared human dignity, as John put it, I think we're all in 100% agreement. And the questions are what terminology and what courses of action best highlight that dignity. To build off of what you were saying, Jim, when you were talking of sexual ethics, we don't stop at consent. We start at consent. Consent is a starting place, not where healthy sexual ethics ends. And so likewise, when we're dealing with a holistic view of society, we don't stop with individual liberty. We start with individual liberty and then go on to the responsibilities that we then have to ensure that liberty for each other in society, and what we do for the common good to build up and to make that liberty something that's possible to be expressed. And I think that when we achieve a healthy society, we will do that not just for land-owning white men, but for all women, children of any gender, race, ethnic minority, religion, etc. We will have unity, equal protection, not just under the law, but in society as well. Thanks so much for the show today, and I'll turn it over to Jim for a closing prayer.
Thanks, Matthew. Thanks, Christy. Thank you, John. Our closing prayer is taken from today's liturgy. It's a reading from the Gospel according to John. Since the Passover of the Jews was near, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. He found in the temple area those who sold oxen, sheep, and doves, as well as the money changers seated there. He made a whip out of cords and drove them all out of the temple area with the sheep and oxen, and spilled the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And to those who sold doves, he said, "Take these out of here and stop making my Father's house a marketplace." His disciples recalled the words of Scripture, "Zeal for your house will consume me." At this, the Jews answered and said to him, "What sign can you show us for doing this?" Jesus answered and said to them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews said, "This temple has been under construction for 46 years, and you will raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking about the temple of his body. Therefore, when he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they came to believe the Scripture and the word Jesus had spoken. Amen. Come, Lord Jesus. Thanks to all, and we look forward to next week. God bless.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.